Hello to everybody. So, Winnie, it's afternoon in Hong Kong. Others of you, it's just noon at IMD and in parts of the continent. My name is Phil Rosenzweig, longtime professor at IMD and occasionally host of the IMD Book Club. And with us today is my colleague Stéphane Girod. Stéphane, welcome. Glad you're with us.
Thank you. Glad to be with you all. Thanks, Phil, for this dialogue, which I look forward to.
Good. So you see with these virtual backgrounds, hard to know where we are, but actually Stéphane is on campus and I'm off campus. Not that it matters, but through the magic of Zoom, we're all here together. We have book discussions like this about once a month. I did one last month. I'll have one coming up. But this month, we're very pleased to have Stéphane with us. And the book this month is here. I have to hold it next to my body so Zoom can show it, called Resetting Management, Thrive with Agility in the Age of Uncertainty. And this was published just this last year, 2021. Stéphane Girod, the lead author with Martin Kralik. Martin, a research associate of yours or colleague? What should we say about Martin?
He is, yeah. He's an affiliate with IMD and we work a lot together. We have a case study that's coming out in June on agile leadership with Rabobank in the Netherlands, and what are the personal challenges for leaders at different levels, to work and transition into these new ways of working.
Sure, and I think these are themes that will be very familiar to people who've read the book. In fact, there are many examples of companies that have done good things on this trajectory, this pathway to agility, and it seemed like almost any one of them could have been a good case study. So my guess is you've taken some of that material and adapted it for classrooms. When I saw this book, I thought, interesting that Stéphane is writing on agility. He's listed as Professor of Strategy and Organizational Innovation. So this idea of organizational innovation is very closely aligned with agility. But actually, I also knew of Stéphane from other things, not just organizational issues, but also luxury goods. And when I spoke with Stéphane a couple of days ago, he said, actually, this is his third career because he has a background in luxury goods, but also then worked in strategy consulting, and then has been with IMD for a number of years. So this book combines, I think, a number of your interests. A lot of the examples do come from the world of luxury, cosmetics, and so forth, but the theme really here is all about agility.
Oh, just 20%, because really it's a research that's across sectors, whether it's B2B and B2C as well.
Okay.
So we really touch on many different type of contacts, and I think it's really important because as I might have an opportunity to explain in this hour, it's that business agility is, there are common principles that we discovered in the research and that we articulate, but at the same time, we want to make sure we recommend that it's not a cut and cookie paste type of approach. Each company will have to form and find the form of agility that suits its circumstances. Yeah. So the sectoral importance plays a role here, the sectoral background.
Okay, well, let's then begin at the beginning. We have this word agility, which is a word that is in the news. It's used quite a bit, but let's be clear at the beginning then. Let's define agility. What is agility and how should we think about it, Stéphane?
Well, in my, we have research and our own surveys that show that unfortunately for a lot of companies or executives, agility is also a buzzword. Mm-hmm. So what we want to try and elucidate at the highest level, it's the ability to adapt to a high unpredictability. And I would emphasize it's not just about reacting, but it's also about shaping your future proactively if you can, because you have developed the curiosity, the hyper-awareness to look outside as opposed to more inward, so that you can also see certain things coming from far and be ready for that. But really, I want to ground it in the context of these highly volatile, uncertain environments that we live. I was discussing yesterday with the head of supply chain at Lamborghini, and they've been living for the past couple of years through 5 crises, right? From the pandemic, the Chinese lockdown, the war in Ukraine now, so it's becoming, this volatility and uncertainty are becoming chronic. And therefore, how do you manage in this type of context?
Sure, because I can't remember a time when managers didn't have to sense the environment and respond to it. But you're suggesting that there really is something that is maybe fundamentally different with the speed and the extent of the uncertainties that we've been facing recently.
Well, we have data and evidence, and we give some in the book about how companies remain increasingly shorter on leadership positions because the churn, and we also have evidence that a lot of companies are playing not to lose. That means they are satisfied with protecting what they are, and very few companies have the ambition to and the ability to leap forward and outperform the others and playing to win. And if anything, I think agility is that capability of playing to win. It's this ambition, it's this ability. And I want to make one point clear right now, is that it's whether or not you use agile. Agile has nothing to do with the capability of agility.
So
they overlap, but it's not necessarily the same things.
So we want to be clear. They have to stop you there, because agile and agility, agile is an adjective, agility is a noun. They sound grammatically, they're slightly different parts of speech, but what's the distinction then? When you say agility is not about agile, how can it not be? Of course it is.
Yeah, so agile understood as a methodology, right? Like an agile method, which is a particular set of methodologies. I might not have the time to touch on that today, but no, I think the point I would like to make is, in uncertain times and highly volatile environments, the key thing for moving forward, to be prepared if things change unexpectedly, is that you want to have options, so that if circumstances change, you can move to something else. So the problem with a lot of the large companies that I studied, and I want to say that that's the context of my research, is through usually large publicly listed companies, is that they tend to be risk averse. And for all sorts of reasons, whether it's the manager's career progression that depends on not making mistakes, or whether it's the success trap, being satisfied with what we have accomplished so far, whether it's pure risk avoidance, so a lot of companies are rooted in protecting that status quo, and I call that the stability part of what companies want to do. Startups, on the other hand, tend to pivot, they experiment, they are innovative, they will take risks. They are much more nimble, usually. So the journey towards agility for a lot of large companies is to move to get nimbler, but without losing what is good about their stability, right? So it's how do you reconcile this competing demand between becoming nimbler without becoming chaotic? Because you still have usually stakeholders, shareholders to reward regularly. Okay, so that's the constraint these companies have. And also large companies tend to be, lots of hierarchical layers, lots of bureaucracies, roles and responsibilities that are not necessarily adding value, especially for the end customer. So they are, what I would say, very complex in the way they operate. And the journey to agility is, how can we simplify without becoming simplistic? So, big companies have multiple countries, often multiple business divisions, product lines. So what fits here might not fit there. So as much as you sometimes need to simplify, you can't oversimplify. So you have a second level of competing demands between simplicity and complexity, right? So to summarize, agility is this mindset for trying to think both and, rather than either or.
Right.
Just being stable and satisfied with that, or being complex. No, it's about being able to get the best of both worlds so that you have those options. And by the way, if some of you don't like the concept or the word agility or agile, feel free to use something else. I have clients who talk about modernizing our companies. It's a capability for future-proofing a company. So let's not be stuck with the language, but let's focus on the capabilities themselves. And that's what we try to uncover in this book. And that's where we give precise guidelines implemented by different companies in various shapes and forms and smells.
Right. And we will get onto those. That's very nicely stated. And I think it answers also the question that was implicit earlier. You talked about agility sometimes being a buzzword that everybody talks about it, but what does it mean? And what you've done, I think, very nicely in this book, and very early on, you set out these two dimensions. So there's the dimension of stable and nimble, complex and simple.
I'm going to give examples of that.
Yeah, and to reconcile these. And that's, I think, one of the contributions here is that you're then trying to take companies beyond just saying, oh, we want to be agile. What does that mean? Well, it means we want to have the ability to be nimble while not sacrificing all of our stability, to be more simple without sacrificing some of the natural benefits of complexity.
It's a little bit subtler because what we discovered is that the stability, sometimes you have to shift the emphasis for creating that stability. So for example, it's about being really clear about the strategic direction that the company should follow. And not every company makes that clear to mobilize and empower employees. So I think that sometimes, of course, you have a fair amount of stability, but it's about also sometimes realizing that you might not have the right type of stability. Okay. And you need to tweak that.
Yeah. Okay, very good. The core of the book moves along, explores really three different levels, if you will. One is strategic agility. Much of the book, in fact, 3 chapters towards the middle, are about organizational agility. And then there's leadership agility. And what you do in every one of these is you say, okay, how do we think about reconciling these tensions between the stable, the nimble, the complex, and the simple? So why don't we address these? What does strategic agility mean? And how does a company achieve that? You have some examples. You talk about GE, you talk about others as well. Help us understand what you mean by strategic agility.
Yeah, so it's the ability to renew as often as necessary the source of your competitive advantage, or even the way you approach the strategizing process. Okay, so and that is both can be reactive, but also we encourage proactively. So let me give you an example of on the stable and nimble dimension. So protecting the stability will be, for example, for strategic agility, is that most large organizations are fortunately not like Kodak. That means they lose their core business in a couple of years, but most companies have a core business. It can be improved, but usually it's thriving, it's good. The question is, how do you also explore your next businesses, your next S-curves at the same time, right? So the first shift is thinking about doing these two things. And the second shift is, so if you want to do both, and so how do you do that? So usually, why are companies struggling with this tension between exploit and explore is, again, politics, budget allocation, disagreement within the top management teams, the status quo, so incentives and rewards, so that managers will be rewarded for expanding the core, but not for innovation, not for the next exploration of next businesses opportunities. Company that also want very often to say, oh, we would like to try this business, but is it going to be big enough? They just want straight away the 3 billion business, as the next opportunity. So that actually creates some processes where in large organization, you kill the next businesses. And there's research showing that whether you separate or you integrate your next businesses, the likelihoods of success are equally low. So what matters, it's you first identify that you need to exploit and explore, but how do you integrate these two worlds? Well, you will need, for example, to leverage a certain amount of levers. So let's look at how Siemens has moved into the space of Internet of Things through data platform strategies, where ultimately industrial assets that the clients need might or might not be Siemens sold. Okay, but Siemens providing a platform for these clients to run their own data analytics and type of thing. So it's a completely new business model, or S-curve for Siemens. But one of the big lessons that we know is that, they created a governance model where not just the CEO or the chief strategy officer were at play, but the heads of the 9 divisional units of Siemens had to co-create this next direction. And the incentives were realigned so that those divisional heads, presidents, would be rewarded on the success of the next businesses at the same time as they would be rewarded for the continuing success of the core businesses. Right? So that's an example of the type of holistic type of efforts you need to put in place to create both and type of strategic agility. Another example that I could give you, and this time it's on the complex simple, and it's not the quality or type of your portfolio, but now it's just about the number of things you have in your portfolio. So we have a lot of companies that are rigid because they have either too few countries, too few customer segments, or too few products, to mitigate the uncertainty, or it's the opposite, way too many. And the way they arbitrage between these type of portfolios is too often based on aggregated averages. So, but these averages hide a lot of granular type of insights, right? So a way forward here is, for example, data and analytics may be the missing link for not leaving too much money on the table, but on the other hand, not having an overly complex set of portfolios. Right? Think about how Netflix is able to manage from a few global films and programs portfolio, they can actually target up to 1,200 customer segments with different marketing and communication and recommendation preferences to give them recommendations about what's in the portfolio for them, right? So, and how do they do that? It's because behind the scene, they've been through waves of data integration, breaking down silos, opening the codes inside the firm so that they could run those powerful AI type of algorithms and become more and more accurate by customer segment while handling sufficiently without too much complexity the product portfolio, And these different portfolios will have different types of dimension, whether it's geography, customer, and product lines.
Okay, good. Let's pause there. So we've talked about strategic agility, and I want to move on to organizational and leadership. But it's also, before doing so, though, in every one of these chapters, and I mentioned this to our listeners, there are diagnostic questions that you pose where
Yes.
the reader will be able to ask themselves questions. And so within strategy, for example, there is a whole series of questions. Is my strategizing nimble? How do I rate myself from very good to poor and so forth? Maybe 10 questions about whether my strategizing is nimble. Is it stable? Is it complex? Is it simple? And so the reader has a chance then to ask themselves questions. Did you use these same questions in gathering data, or is this more a diagnostic that readers can do, but you haven't really gathered large-scale data in response to those questions?
Right. So there's the answer is twofolded, right? I think these diagnoses are tools that readers can do. If you're interested and look at the book, you can do with your teams, you can do with your management, you can do with your peers to get a collective sense of where you think you are, and at least have a sense of, are we considering the right, for example, trade-offs, so competing demands on the strategy level, where are our strengths and where are our weaknesses, for example. When you come to IMD classes, then I usually have more aggregated data. And it's interesting, what I discovered is that, so I have participants from middle management to all the way to the top. And the answers usually from middle management, and the more junior they are, the more pessimistic they are. And the higher up, the higher the scores. So if anything, from the aggregated data, I discovered that, this is one of the problems in organization, is that top managers do not want to necessarily see all the constraints that the lower level employees are facing, and which is exactly the point that creates frustration, under engagement. In the US, we're talking about the great resignation, people leaving companies, people struggling to recruit. And that's why we call the book Resetting Management. It's because it's one of the reasons, unless organizations and the management model changes to accommodate the expectations, especially perhaps of newer generations of employees, but also to respond to the uncertainty, the volatile environment. But particularly, the big realization is that these uncertain environments, you cannot get the answers, you cannot get the actions to adapt on your own. More and more, this is a network, collective effort. So resetting management is really about looking how you can create a much greater impact by collaborating in the workforce, in the organization, to address the challenges that are ahead of us.
Okay, good. Thank you for that. Why don't we move on and spend some time on organizational agility? And in fact, you have 3 chapters there. Really, I think in some ways, the conceptual heart of the book is about organizational agility. And you have, to my mind, at least some rather interesting findings about what you call pockets of agility and the trajectory that companies go on. You begin by talking about, I'm on page 66 here, 8 capabilities that help you build organizational agility. And the readers won't be surprised, these fall out from these 4 dimensions. Can you help us a little bit about what these capabilities are? I think we'll be interested to hear that from you.
Yeah, so on the nimble side, the first thing you will need to focus on is create small functional teams. I think the cross-functionality, and we see that for delivering digital transformation, we see that for delivering sustainability transformation, more and integrated customer journeys. More and more, you will have to create transversality. So usually principle 1 and 2 are about small cross-functional teams where employees are empowered to innovate fast around customers. And if you start innovating around customers, this is where sometimes the agile methodology, like the lean startup, can really help, is that you're going to collect customer feedback regularly. You're going to be able to reprioritize certain things, and that gives you some answers and flexibility in the wake of uncertainty. But this empowerment of teams needs to happen within a frame. And this is where strategic direction that's clearly communicated and the mobilization of employees around clear performance targets, accountability, and commitment to performance is extremely important. These are the good features of stability. Because if small functional teams start to innovate and run in every direction, how can you deliver on your strategy and be a company?
Sure.
Right? So, you know, one of my clients, Telenor, talks about tight, loose, tight. A lot of companies are micromanaging employees, and they don't give them any indication of why they're doing it and what's the direction, what's the purpose to do that. Here they're too loose. We want to reverse that. You don't micromanage your employees. They will find the solutions, but you give them the direction and they find the roadmap to get there.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's how you handle this tension between stable and nimble from an organizational and cultural dimension.
So you're referring to what they call loose, tight coupling.
Yes.
Yes.
No, not coupling, but reversing where management makes or pays attention to.
Yeah.
Be tight on the direction you give, but be loose on how your employees discover the roadmap to get there.
Which is not a new idea. I mean, Peters and Waterman wrote about that in Search of Excellence, drawing on Carl Weick. These are ideas from 50 years ago, right?
Yeah, so you know what's it's very likely, but it's more compelling to implement that now than it was 50 years ago when we were in a much more predictable type of environment. Secondly, you have the dimensions of digital transformation. That's also not just an outcome, but it's also an input in how we work in companies that are also changing things compared to 50 years ago.
Sure, sure. Okay, good. Tell us about this notion of pockets. I thought one thing that was quite interesting was that there need not be a uniform approach. There could be elements or parts of a company that would adopt certain approaches that another one might not. And I thought that was a very nice lesson because it suggested that you could be much more fine-grained in where you saw opportunities for the implementation of agility.
Yeah, so before I respond to your question, I haven't finished actually explaining these 8 principles of organizational agility, because on the simplification side, it's about how can you remove unnecessary silos and enhance collaboration in the organization. And usually silos happen because you have too many hierarchical layers. So that could be one type of silo, but it's about also, you know, the complexity of processes and bureaucratic processes that exist in the organization. I worked with one pharmaceutical company, and in their journey towards agility, they discovered that they were over-reporting for drug authorization to a margin of 30% compared to what the regulator was asking. Bureaucracies create more bureaucracies, and that's not creating value and is not liberating and empowering employees. So think about what is unnecessary bureaucracies. But remember on the complexity side that because of your diversity in your companies, what you decide here might not fit there. So you will have to adapt what, where and how you simplify. And the final dimension of agility is this culture of learning, this curiosity. There is no agility without learning, whether it's employee learning, organizational learning, the being connected to the outside world, trying to anticipate. And learning is also about relearning in a fast changing environment. You know, the agility mindset is about you can't predict what's going to happen. So you start small, you test, you learn, you improve, and you might scale, you know. And so learning is at the core. And learning is complex to organize because it requires the creation of networks in the organization. One example I found fascinating yesterday in the Financial Times. There's a piece you can find about how the cyber network organization of the Ukraine is giving them an edge in the cyber war against Russia, because the cyber world of Russia is still Soviet style, very hierarchical, and they can't actually, people don't have enough room and autonomy to respond. But in the networks of Ukraine, there is this ability to learn from each other so that you can respond quicker to uncertainty. I think it was a great case of agility in the cyber warfare. You know, so it's just not actually in the business world we can see this concept being adopted.
So we're at about halfway through, and I want to move on to issues of leadership, and I also want to move on to issues of the implementation, what your experience has been. But before doing that, this is probably a good time to pause and ask any of our participants, of our listeners, do you have any questions for Stéphane? The chat function is open, and if there are any questions you have, any follow-up to something that he said or anything particular that you'd like to make sure we address, you can write that now. If nobody writes now, we'll carry on, but we will keep an eye on the chat function. And as there are questions, we'll try to address those as well. Very good. So just as there are diagnostic questions about strategy, there are also many diagnostic questions that a reader is able to look at in Stéphane's book about organizational agility. And again, the title here, Resetting Management, Thrive with Agility in an Age of Uncertainty. And as Stéphane has pointed out, some of these ideas have been around in some ways for a while, but the sheer degree of uncertainty combined with some of the competitive pressures, some of the digital initiatives mean that things are quite different now, which is why you're describing this as really a reset of management. Let's move on to the leadership piece, because what's very important here is you take it from the level of strategy to organization to some of the behaviors that individual leaders must have that they might not have had before. You talk about the 4 C's. What are the 4 C's? And what are the challenges for leaders on those 4 C's?
So Phil, I don't respond to the question of the journeys or configurations, or do you want to come back to that later?
No, if you want to carry on with that, that's fine. If you have more to say on organization, it's as you like, whatever you think is best to present the ideas in the book, I'm very happy to follow.
No, because once we are on the word of organizational agility, and before we move to agile leadership, the point I would like to make is that, so in the research, organizationally speaking, we look at 10 multinational companies, really big ones. All of them were non-digital native, so transitioning towards much more digital proficiency. And we discovered that these companies can be clustered in 3 ways. And one cluster, for them, the journey towards agility is more about, we discovered, for example, reconciling the local global type of tensions. A luxury good company that was overly centralized at headquarters in Europe, had to accommodate faster changing realities with China and had to allocate much more autonomy to the Chinese unit while networking much more the international operations, right? So much more collaboration, much more delegation to frontline employees within the parameters of the brand guideline and the luxury guidelines of this company. So clearly, but for a lot of companies, this journey towards agility they've done it many years ago. And so depending on your circumstances, you place what agility means in function of that. Then we discovered a big cluster. In fact, I think 7 companies, no, 6 companies out of our 10 are rolling out agile methods, whether it's lean startup, Scrum, in the traditional hierarchy. And this is a configuration where the two worlds, traditional management and agile ways of working, have to collaborate. And very often that's very hard to do. Okay. And we have a third cluster of the company ING Bank in the Netherlands and Haier in China, the leader of white appliance goods, that have absolutely revolutionary types of organizational forms. And one is using agile at scale, the other one is not using agile at all, but you recognize the characteristics of agility, right? And you recognize the characteristic in all the 10 companies, but they implement them in different forms and flavors. Probably because of the degree of volatility or disruption in their industry. It depends also on the cash and the money that they have. It depends on the competitive pressures and even the ambitions of top management. So it's important to realize, and these 3 chapters in the book,
that's right,
look at these 3 configurations and these 3 journeys.
Yeah, and I thought that was really the heart of the book. 4, 5, and 6 are the chapters. I think what I'm hearing you say is that you hadn't started out thinking about these 3 categories, but as you looked at the 10 companies, they seem to fall into these 3.
Yeah.
And did it seem as if each of them was doing properly, correctly, what made sense to them? Or were there some that you looked at them and thought, there really is an opportunity to be more transformational or bolder? Did you have any thought about whether they might have done differently than they did, or did you just accept that they did what worked for them?
I think then that's where the ambition comes from, So we just wrapped up 14 interviews inside Rabobank, and one of the C-suite executives told us, that their agility transformation using agile at scale in that context, which is not the context of Haier, but they say, what we're able to accomplish, we would never come back to the traditional hierarchical organizational design. So I asked him, so why are not more companies moving in that direction? And his answer was, it's egos. The top management, they of course are aware of the potential of that type of new or next organizational model, but they, in my view, misleadingly think that they're going to lose power. And that's perhaps the link with your leadership question, Phil, because from a leadership perspective, you don't lose power. You change to new roles, new competencies, new responsibilities, right?
Let me just try to be very clear on what you're saying here. When you said Rabobank had gone to this new model, so we would never go back to the old one. Can you give me a very specific example of how the new approach differed from the old one? What was really different?
Well, they don't have functional departments anymore.
Okay.
Right? Everything has to be broken down into cross-functional teams, innovating around the customer, using Scrum.
What is Scrum? You've used the word a few times. What is Scrum?
Scrum is an agile way of working that is about breaking down. It emerged in the software industry. So it's very important for delivering digital solutions. And it's cross-functional teams, mix of data scientists, programmers, user experience specialists with business people, breaking down complex projects into small projects and working in 2-week sprints to deliver something quicker to the customer.
Good, thank you. Okay, good. So that's a great example. So now let's take that as a bridge and talk about leadership, because what you're saying is, well, people might have had certain expectations about hierarchy or predictability, but that can also breed inertia. And we need a different mindset among people to be happy to work and effective to work in a new way. So let's move on now to the chapter that talks about agility in leadership. And again, you've got diagnostics there, focusing on these 4 C's. So why don't we move on to the 4 C's then?
So the first one is the coaching capability that helps you empower your employees, right? To be nimble and innovate and be empowered. So coaching is, of course, the opposite of wishy-washy type of management style. You will still have, tough conversations, and you will still have to actually allocate budgets, make choices and priorities. Okay, so but coaching is about helping employees to discover their potential, and that will propel the amount of innovation, entrepreneurship that you want to bring in the company, right? So, but as we said, you also need to really make sure that employees are on track, right? So the corresponding C on the stability part is the cohesion. And in resetting management, we explained that not everything changes in management. That's your question, Phil, earlier about are something old. So, for example, it will be always super important for managers to be visionary, set a direction and a strategy. Okay, what's going to be different with cohesion is that how many of you have strategies that are 100 pages of PowerPoints that no one remembers, understands, nothing is clear about what's in it for the customer, for example. So you will have to develop your communication skills, your storytelling skills, focusing on the why, the motivation. That's going to keep employees on track and give them some sense of the framework within which they are empowered. Okay. On the simplicity side, you're going to work more on your connection capabilities. How can you role model the collaborative mindset that everyone needs to have in the company? And finally, on the complex side, the corresponding leadership competence is what I call cognition. It's about systemic thinking, not just thinking about you, but the impact of the environment. It's about the curiosity. It's about recognizing that you might not have all the answers, even if you are an experienced leader, but that you're going to consult maybe junior colleagues to co-create the solutions with you. So these are experiences of cognition.
Okay,
so I think we got a comment in the chat box, Phil, now.
So Bogdan asked a question. So let me just read it. In parallel of agility, there is a bureaucratic trend too, such as so complex sustainability reporting in the future. I'm afraid that kind of reporting can only be done by consultants. I mean, companies can be transformational in terms of sustainability and agile, but cannot prove that so easy without people who are focused only on reporting. Do you have a sense of what Bogdan is getting at here, Stéphane, and can you address this point?
Yes, I completely agree with Bogdan. It's the reality in many firms, and that's why they struggle so much, to actually move towards agility. But what I want to say, we have examples in our cases where, of bold companies that don't hide behind those excuses to try and improve and become more agile and empower their employees and create higher levels of innovation through networking and collaboration. But it's a permanent work, there needs to be the drive, the leadership commitment to creating that.
Yeah, because I think what he's getting at here is that at the same time that we want this speed and responsiveness and nimbleness, there's also the obligations for reporting that seems to get us back to the complex and the slow.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, as he mentions the word transformation, and
I have a good, it's coming to come in our Rabobank case, for them, from a regulatory perspective, they are forced to decommission, I don't know, thousands of IT systems, right? And now for a couple of years, the innovation, the scope of the organization is not just on innovation as much as they would like it to be, but it's about delivering on these regulatory pressures.
Yeah.
Right. And I think, well, they're using the agile ways of working that they've put in place to still maximize the productivity and efficiency through collaboration in these teams to still deliver better customer experience. Okay. So, but they recognize that it creates a lot of frustrations, but it's the regulation and we have to do it. But the key is not to lose sight of the objectives and not to use regulation as an excuse for not doing anything.
And maybe that actually begins to answer the question I want to ask you now, which is, you've laid out a lot of, I think, good principles and diagnostics, and we want to be these 4 different, these 8 capabilities and so forth. But in actually getting it done, in going from the aspiration to the reality, it's not always a very easy task. And so the last couple chapters of the book talk about these questions of delivering on the vision, of implementation. I'd be interested in hearing from you. Are there some keys to successful implementation? Are there some hurdles, some challenges that you've seen over and over that some companies have not been able to navigate well? What can you tell us about going from the desire for agility to actual implementation?
Well, very good question. So yeah, the last 2 chapters are about transformation journeys. And what we discover is that there needs to be the ambition, the leadership commitment to really change, because a lot of companies, especially those that are in those hybrid cluster of agile ways of working in the traditional hierarchy, the 2 worlds tend to clash a lot because there's no will to actually change or compromise or collaborate beyond the differences. Then what's going to be important is to realize that these are long haul journeys, like any transformation. So although we're talking about agility transformation, it's not going to happen in an instant. That's why there needs to be pushing. But what I discovered what we discovered, Martin and I, in the research is that perhaps a new way of approaching change is to, rather than planning everything up front, you remember, Phil, Procter & Gamble, when they implemented Organization 2005, I think they planned it for 2 years. It's to plan, but to test it, to pilot it, and to learn, adapt, and then move on and scale. What we discovered is that there are two types of journeys that companies take. One, which is the bottom-up type of initiatives where there's going to be a lot of initiatives. And at the end of the day, you start wondering, these companies think, have we not created more complexity? Yeah. Because no one is able to understand what the others are doing. And there's the other journey where you pilot a template for X amount of years, you learn, you improve it, and then you move on to roll it out on a larger scale in other part of your companies. Okay, that would be another type of important finding about this journey. Fundamentally, fourth remark is that you will need to find ways to link the digital talent and the business talent. You know, digital is an important source of competitive advantage, so as a strategic objective, but it's also a very important enabler of to become more agile. So unless these teams, these people start working together, and that's where cross-functionality is important, aligned around common objectives that are mattering for the business, then you will struggle in those journeys.
Okay, so in a sense, you're saying that the journey towards agility also has to be an agile journey. It's yes. There's a nimbleness involved in rolling this out. Good. Yeah. Yeah. So we just have a few minutes to go. Let me again ask if any of our participants have a question, even a rather particular one, maybe relating to an industry that you're familiar with or a present challenge. So we'll keep an eye out for that on the chat room. Otherwise, you said you have some cases that are being written and you're bringing this into classrooms. What are some of the ways that you're bringing these ideas from your research to a broader audience? The book is one way, classrooms, what other things can people look to if they want to know more about this from you?
Yeah, so we have a web page within the IMD knowledge platform. You can type IMD resetting management, and you will see a series of videos and articles, resources that I published, you know, sometimes with Martin, and you can have a look at that. I'm regularly invited for presentations by some of our clients or people who have known about me, like in the through webinars or things that I've given here at IMD. Yeah, that's usually how you will find more information.
On the IMD page, you said what, IMD and / resetting management, something like that? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
You will find a page dedicated.
And again, the book is Resetting Management. Let me hold it against me here. Thrive with Agility in the Age of Uncertainty. Kogan Page is the publisher, London and New York, 2021. So here, Bogdan has asked another question. Where would organizational learning and development, L&D, in this context as companies grow and their people grow and people change organizations faster than in the past? I guess that's an interesting idea. How does a company think about leadership and development when there's so much turnover and so much flux and fluidity in organizations?
Yeah, I think it's even more important as an organization, and the more it's connected to the business agenda and the future business agenda, the more proactive you're going to be able to evolve your workforce. The big thing that I noticed in the organization where we did the research is that for agility, it's about a lot about also peer-to-peer learning. Mm-hmm. So creating the platforms and access to some resources where people build their own backpack to change and continuously upgrade each other is hugely important. So, you know, in a fast changing world, you can't just drive everything top down.
Sure.
You also have to create the infrastructure, the frame within which employees are going to also contribute. So communities, guilds within these organizations are going to be really important to keep learning.
Okay, there's a particular question here from Karen about follow-on work. I'm going to leave that. You can follow up with her, but let me leave two questions with you, Stéphane. I'd like you to think about. I'd like you to help us. One is, in the research that you've done, what's the biggest surprise that you've had? What was the thing that maybe you hadn't been so sure about that was a surprise? And the final thing is what you'd like us to make sure we take away. And Karen, I think you'll be able to follow up with her. Karen, it's probably best if Stéphane takes contact with you directly. So biggest surprises and a final takeaway for us, please.
Well, the biggest surprise was that, you know, so it's a journey, it's consistent with a lot of change management, you know, you need to be patient, you need to dedicate energy, commitment, resources. I think the biggest discoveries were how bold some organizations who are in regulated industries or multinational companies with tens of thousands of employees, how bold they are prepared to push the limits of organizational design to stay ahead. And how experimental. I think that was my biggest surprise.
And maybe that's a lesson for others who are not quite as bold, that actually you can push the boundaries more than you might imagine that you can.
Yeah, and that's why I want to reemphasize, you can create competitive advantage with your organization. It's not just about products or markets where you are, or being first or fast follower or whatever. The organization is also really, really important. And we have great examples of innovation in the book that are attracting attention, that are not necessarily easy to replicate, but think about it. What does organizational innovation mean for you?
Okay, and that's a great question to leave with. And that's the title that Stéphane has, Professor of Strategy and Organizational Innovation, not just product innovation, service innovation, but how to organize in a way that is innovative and adds value and competitive advantage. Any final words as we wrap up, Stéphane? Otherwise, if there's any final questions from the audience as well, we'd be happy to get those. I think Karen has given contact information.
I've got Karen, I have your email. Thank you. I've written it down. I will contact you. Thank you very much. No, I would just want to thank you all for joining today, and Phil, want to thank you for these very interesting, penetrating questions. I think you kept really a very lively discussion going.
Very good. Well, thanks to all, and to all who participated. We always record these, and so if you know anybody who was not able to follow with us real time, they should be able to go to the IMD website, and I'm not sure the exact clicks, but you'll find those and be able to watch this at your leisure. The book again, Resetting Management, Thrive with Agility in the Age of Uncertainty. And the idea of we're at a time now where there really is a fundamental reset that is calling for a rethinking of things, and a very good book that talks at the level of strategy, at the level of organization, and at the level of leadership, and then the implementation as well. So we leave it there. Stéphane, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Good day to everybody. Thank you very much.
Great.
Okay.
Bye.